asleep, right? We don't want you falling asleep. So, we're ready? Awesome. We are privileged to have with us this afternoon, for those who are watching online as well as those who are in the building, Pastor Dana and Edmond. Pastor Edmond was our speaker for today for our Black History Month celebration. Pastor Edmond is a long-standing administrator in the Black Seventh-day Adventist work. He's going to present a presentation to us this afternoon, and this time entitled, "This is Our Story." So we're going to give it over to Pastor Dana C. Edmonds. Afterwards, after the presentation, we'll open up the floor for some questions as well.
All right, thank you, Pastor. You can tell who has young children when you're going to start off with Father Abraham. You only do that when you're young with young children. All right, thank you for coming. This is an important topic, and so I appreciate those of you who are here. And we're going to get started right away. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to discuss. First of all, we're going to tell you what we're going to share with you what a regional conference is and is not, because there are things that people think are true that are not true. So first of all, we're going to tell you, we're going to define a regional conference. Then we're going to, in part two, we're going to tell you how we got them. And then part three, we're going to tell you why we still need them. Because some of the things I'm going to tell you date back to when regional conferences started, which was 81 years ago. So I remember when I first started doing these seminars, I finished one in a particular conference. They said, "Yeah, Elder Edmond, all that's well and good, but what you told us deals with the past. Why do we need them today?" So I'm going to answer that question in part three. Here's why we still need them. And then I'm going to conclude with some things that people think when they think about regional conferences that aren't true. We're going to kind of explode some myths about regional conferences, okay? So what they are, how we got them, why we still need them, and some things that people think that are not true about them. All right? So let us get started. Okay, where am I pointing? Do I point here? Which way do I point? Point that way. Okay, but before I do that, the Office for Regional Conference Ministries, which probably no one besides maybe the pastor and Mrs. Edmond know what it really does. The Office for Regional Conference Ministry coordinates all the things that regional conferences do together. For example, a few months ago, down not too far from here, we had United Youth Congress. Remember that? Where all the young people from all over the country. The sponsor for that was the Office for Regional Conference Ministries, all right? And in our role as sponsor, we gave the Beta Brethren almost $250,000 so they could do United Youth Congress. Also, our CFO was the CFO for United Youth Congress. It costs between $1.5 million and $2 million to do United Youth Congress, and so they needed somebody to do the finances. So our CFO was the CFO for United Youth Congress. What basically, if you think in terms of what unions do, like you're in Southern Union, unions they call meetings that bring people from a wide geographical area together, and they also make appropriations. That's what our office does. So all the things that regional conferences do together, United Youth Congress, Breath of Life. You've heard of Breath of Life, right? Okay, our office contributes almost $300,000 to Breath of Life. What used to happen in the old days was for these major things that we do together. PELC is another example. They used to, in essence, bill each of the conferences and say, in order for us to have United Youth Congress, your conference needs to contribute X amount of dollars, okay? Not all the conferences would always fulfill their obligations. So what the regional conferences did was they came up with a more efficient way to do this. And so each conference contributes 10.75% of their tithe, most of which goes to our retirement program. The rest of it goes to fund the ministries that regional conferences have in common. And they do that by sending the money to our office and saying, we're not going to tell you how to distribute. We're just going to tell you, these are the ministries we want funded. We want United Youth Congress funded. We want Message Magazine funded. We want Breath of Life funded. We want Regional Voice funded. And so what our office does is we take, it's just like what Southern Union does. Southeastern Conference contributes a certain amount of tithe to the Southern Union. And the Southern Union makes appropriations for education, for evangelism. Now the conferences don't tell them how to fund it. They just say, we want this funded. And so the unions make appropriation. If regional conferences had their own union, that's what our office would do. One of the things that your union does is it has a news magazine. It's called the Southern Tidings. All right, you get that free. Now the reason why you don't have to pay for it is Southeastern pays for it. They pay the money, and so likewise, the regional conferences have a news magazine that tells you all the things that go on in regional conferences. You get the Southern Tidings in the mail. It is very expensive. So we do not mail out the Regional Voice, generally speaking. There are about 500 copies that we send out, but generally speaking, it's an online magazine. So there's a QR code. All you have to do is take a picture of the QR code and you can get the Regional Voice free. Now it costs my former office about $100,000 a year to produce that. And it gets produced 4 times a year, April, June, September, and December. So the April magazine, which we call the spring edition, it's being worked on now. Even though I'm retired, I was asked to stay on for a year to publish the Regional Voice. So that's one of the things that I do in retirement. So you will get that around mid-April. Well, the online copy comes out first. So you'll get that if you do the QR code. First of all, you can see copies that you've missed, and then around the 1st of April, you'll get the new copy. All right? All right, so I wanted to make that available to you so that you can get it for free. There's not many things free in life, but it's about a 65-page magazine, and we kind of think it's well done. So we like it. We hope you'll like it too. All right. I'm trying to give everybody a chance to do the QR thing. I'm your stereotypical old person that struggles with technology. I've just learned how to operate QR codes. I'm very proud of myself. All right. Last night when it was time to park my car at the hotel, you had to use Dr. Walton, you had to use a QR code. I was very proud of myself. I was able to take care of my parking. All right? The bad thing about technology, if you're old like me, as soon as you learn how to do one thing, then they change it. So it's kind of a struggle. Young people, they grew up with it, but for us, if they would just, I tell my wife all the time, if they would just leave it alone, I could handle it. And what's really a challenge for me is, for all these years as a church administrator, I had somebody else to handle technology. And now I have to figure out all this stuff on my own. All right. Okay, now we're ready to get started. Everybody good? Everybody's got the QR code? We're good? We're ready to take off? Okay, as soon as I get ready to take off, then people start pulling out their cameras. No, don't stop him. No. Did you need to take it? He's good. Okay, all right. Your house kind of looks like my house, where Mrs. Edmond runs everything. All right, okay. All right, you know how they when they say if mommy's not happy, nobody's happy, and if daddy's not happy, nobody cares. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, the first question we're going to ask is, what is a regional conference? In the United States, and only in the United States, there are two kinds of conferences. The United States is the only place where this is true. A few years ago, all the regional conferences had a summit meeting, which is another thing that our office organized. A summit meeting between the African leadership, African Adventist leadership, and the African American leadership. We met in Kenya on the campus of Adventist University of Africa. The reason why that was important is most of you, we had this discussion at lunch, most of you do not know that half of all Seventh-day Adventists live on the continent of Africa. So when you add all the people who were born in Africa with people like us who descended from Africa, but who live in other countries, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, watch this now, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is overwhelmingly a church of color. Amen. When you add our Spanish-speaking brethren, the church is probably about 80% people of color. Okay? But the largest demographic group in the Seventh-day Adventist Church by far, no one else comes close. The majority of Seventh-day Adventists look like you. All right? So when we had a meeting with our brethren in Africa and we tried to explain regional conferences to them, they didn't get it because there's nothing like regional conferences in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. All right? There are two kinds, but in the United States and only in the United States, there are two kinds of conferences. You think black conferences and white conferences. That's not true. Regional conferences and state conferences, all right? Regional conferences are all the churches in a region coming together and forming a conference. Now, you all in Southeastern Conference are the closest thing that regional conferences have to a state conference, because your conference really is the state of Florida, minus Northwest Florida, which belongs to South Central. Pensacola, Panama City doesn't belong to you, all right? But everything else in Florida, so you are almost a state conference. You used to be a regional conference when it was you in South Atlantic. Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, that's a regional conference. All the churches in a region coming together. I'm from South Central Conference, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Northwest Florida, all the churches in a region. So the term regional conference does not refer to ethnicity like we think. It refers to territory. Now, regional conferences are black administered. Okay, State conferences are all the churches in a state. Florida Conference, Carolina Conference, Ohio Conference, Pennsylvania Conference, all the churches in a state. Those are those used to be all Caucasian, okay? Now they are increasingly mixed. The Seventh-day Adventist Church 40 years ago in North America was over 70% Caucasian. Today, it's about 33% Caucasian, okay? So state conferences are a lot less Caucasian than they used to be. Florida Conference, for example, is almost certainly minority Caucasian. Okay, all right, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we covered the first part. What is a regional conference? All the churches in a region coming together to form a conference. Now, since state conferences started about 140 years ago. Regional conferences started 80 years ago. So what a number of you are wondering is, why do we have two different conferences doing the same thing in the same area? Southeastern and Orlando, while the conference offices are relatively far apart, that's only because Orlando is so big. They both operate out of the Orlando area, all right? In South Central, where I'm from, and Kentucky 10, which is the state conference, their conference offices are about 10 miles apart. They operate in the same city. If I'm remembering right, and now that I'm old, I might not be remembering right, but if I'm remembering right, there's one city where Kentucky 10 and South Central have the same church, not just on the same city, but on the same street, just on opposite ends of the street, all right? So why is that? And this is what people say. This is what people say. And this is the reason why it's important to know your history. Because when you don't know your history, then you believe certain things that aren't true. Okay, so you've heard people say, I don't believe in black conferences and white conferences. In heaven, there's not going to be a white conference. There's not going to be a black conference. There's not going to be any conference. There's not going to be a general conference. But nobody's talking about getting rid of the general conference. Understand the difference between what people say and what they mean. When people say, I don't believe in black conferences or white conferences, what they really mean is they don't believe in regional conferences. There's no discussion ever about getting rid of state conferences. There has been, over the years, a lot of discussion about getting rid of regional conferences. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, they had a meeting, the North American Division had a meeting that brought all the church administrators who were administrators in anything, whether it was a school or a conference or the union or division. They brought us all together for a meeting in Washington to talk about reorganizing the church. Do you know what one of the discussions was? Getting rid of regional conferences. So the discussion was not getting rid of state conferences. The discussion was, why do we need regional conferences? All right? And so we're going to answer that question in just a minute. But you need to understand. That's why you need to that's why you need to understand know your history, to understand when people say, I don't believe in separate conferences, let's all come together. That sounds good. But what they really mean when they say let's all come together is they don't mean we're coming to regional conferences. What they mean is they want regional conferences to merge into state conferences, okay? I remember when I first became executive director for Office of Regional Conference Ministries. Oakwood came to me and they said, Elder Edmond, we want you to come and talk to our students about why we need regional conferences. And I said, I'm happy to do that. But I started off by saying, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to come to my school to talk about regional conferences and why we still need them, but understand this. I was on the board of Southern Adventist University for 7 years. At no point did anybody on that board say, we need to tell our students why we need state conferences. The need for state conference is assumed. We are the only people who have to justify our existence. Think about it for a minute. Nobody says, why do we have Spanish-speaking churches, and why do we have Korean churches, and why do we have French-speaking? Nobody asked that. But people do ask, they don't even ask why do we have white churches, but they do ask why do we need black churches, okay? We are the only people who have to justify our existence, okay? And that's the reason why you need to know your history. All right, so I'm about to give it to you. All right, here we go. Why do we have regional? Aren't they an unnecessary duplication? That's what people ask. All right, here I'm going to answer that question. But I need 6 of you to help me. All right? So can I get 6 volunteers to come down front? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need a lady. I have all men. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. Okay. And because you volunteered, you get the special position. You are Mrs. Are you Miss or Mrs.? Mrs. Okay. You are Mrs. Lake Region. You're Mrs. Lake Region. Okay. Now Lake Region. No. You over here. No. He trying to take your special place here. Okay. No. She's by herself. She's special. Okay. Now Lake Region was the first regional conference. They started in 1945. Okay, so you are Miss Lake Region. All right, now, Lake Region covers Illinois, Indiana, the states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. All right? So inside those territories that she covers are 5 state conferences. All right? So each of you gentlemen are going to represent the state conferences, okay? You're Illinois. You're the Illinois conference. You're Indiana. How about that? Indiana. Okay, you're Michigan. You're Wisconsin. And you're Minnesota. Okay, now, these 5 conferences cover the same territory that Lake Region covers. Okay, so she has a conference office. It's in suburban Illinois, really nice, okay? But he has a conference office, 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 okay? She has a president, young fella, Abraham Henry, youngest president, he's still in his 30s. Made me feel really old when I said, man, you're younger than my children, okay? So you have a president, but you have a president, 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 all right? She has a campground for camp meeting, right? But guess what? You have a campground, you have a campground, you have a campground, you have a campground, you have a campground. She has people that work in her conference office, like the youth director and the education director, all those kind of people, right? But you have them, 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 all right? everything that all of them have, she has by herself. Now, here's my question, ladies and gentlemen. Who is really duplicating services? Her or all of them? Who costs more money to operate? Her or all of them? She costs literally tens of millions of dollars less to operate than all of them. Yet, even though she operates on less income, okay? Over the last 80 years, she has grown 4 times faster than them. But their idea of diversity is not for them to be her, it's for her to come over and join them. But tell me, ladies and gentlemen, if you're operating a business and one business costs less money to operate but is more productive, are you going to close down the productive business and keep the one that costs more money? Or now we need both. We need both. But the discussion always is we don't really need her, but we do need all of them. So so understand again, when people say let's all come together, they don't mean they going to her. They mean they want her to shut down and join them. All right, let's give a hand to my volunteers. All right. Okay, wait.
It's interesting what Pastor Edmond is saying. In 1999, I sat in on a symposium at the General Conference. This was the discussion, and they were mentioning from the podium that this is a duplication of services, that the regional conferences are a duplication of services, and that they're not necessary. And one of the pastors, I won't mention his name, but he used to be a pastor of Pioneer Memorial Church. He said the regional conferences need to go away.
He made a crusade of that. Okay. All right, so this is what they are. And now we're going to talk about how we got them. Okay? We already talked about this, but here I want to show you this one. Look, in the same geographic territory of the 9 regional conferences, there are 30 state conferences. Let that sink in. In the same territory of the 9 regional conferences are 30. Do you realize it costs hundreds of millions of dollars more to operate their 30 than to operate our 9? But our 9, the regional conferences have grown 4 times faster than the rest of the church in North America over the last 80 years. All right? Okay, now, how do we get them? I'm going to talk to you about 3 pivotal figures in African American Adventist history. By the way, when you come to Huntsville, in our office is one of only 2 American Adventist history museums in the whole country. And this is the one in my former office is the one that's most up to date. All right, and so you'll see some of these people. Charles M. Kinney. Charles M. Kinney was the first African American pastor to be ordained. All right, ordination simply is the public recognition of the call of God on a pastor's life. That's what ordination is. Okay. About 10 years ago, there was this great long discussion about ordaining women, right? And the church voted not to do that. Now, I am not here to relitigate that. What I am here to point out is the challenge of our church's position. And that is, if all ordination is the recognition of the call of God on a person's life, why would you want to have any pastor, male or female, who God didn't call? Okay? I used to be a conference president. I'm telling you, I'm not hiring you unless I think that you're called by God. Okay? So the Adventist church employs females who are either called or not called. If they're not called, why did you hire them? If they are called, then don't you really need to recognize that call? Okay. Well, that's a good question. In each conference has an ordination review committee. And what they do is they look at what the pastor has done and all that sort of thing. And there is a standard for men, okay? But that standard doesn't apply to women. In other words, when one of the first things that I used to, because I chaired my conference's ordination committee, one of the first things I wanted to look at was the baptisms of a particular pastor, because that's one of the proofs of their calling. Okay. So what we have now, and keep in mind, I'm not here to talk about it one way or the other. I'm just talking about the difficulty of the position of the Adventist church, which says female pastor X can baptize 1 million people and it doesn't matter because we're not recognizing her calling. Where male pastor Y can baptize 100 people and we say, okay, he's called by God. All right? With men, we look at what they do. With women, we just look at their gender. Okay? Now, you can do with that whatever you want. All right? But my point is, this is the first African American to be ordained. And he really proved his calling because there were large blocks of time where he wasn't paid. He wasn't paid. Now, this is the time I need to say two things. One is, in telling you the story of African American Adventism, I am forced to tell you that as much as I love the Adventist church, my grandmother joined, nobody is more Adventist than me. My grandmother joined this church after hearing Edson White preach on the Morning Star in Vicksburg, Mississippi. That's way back there, okay? When I was growing up, I had no non-Adventist relatives on either side of my family, okay? So I went to all Adventist schools, became an Adventist pastor, married an Adventist school teacher, produced another Adventist school teacher. So I am very proud of my Adventist roots, all right? But as Al Gore would put it, the inconvenient truth of the Adventist church is it has an ugly and unfortunate history of racism. I can't tell you the story, our story, without telling you that. Okay? That Seventh-day Adventist church, particularly when we started regional conferences, was every bit as segregated as the rest of society. Now, okay, so I'm telling you that on the front end because I'm hoping you can handle everything I'm going to tell you. Okay? If you can't, this is a good time to jump ship. Okay? Because I'm going to tell you some pretty terrible things about God's church. Now the other thing I need to say, which is actually, I said two things, actually three things. The other thing is all of us have issues. I'm about to tell you about the issues of our brothers, but we have issues too, all right? So I need you not to have an issue about our brother's issues, all right? Can you do that? Oh, you got quiet on me. I'm glad you weren't this way this morning in church. All right, okay, all right. Let's go on. Okay, everybody ready? Okay, here we go. Okay, one of the, as late as the 70s, it was, in certain areas, it was not uncommon to pay black workers less than white workers. Okay? I have a Caucasian friend who's president of a conference. He sent me he said, Dana, you can't say where you got this, but I was going through the minutes of my conference, and I came across something that was really bad. I came across the voted action of my conference's executive committee to pay black workers less than white workers. Okay, all right. So there were times when he just didn't get paid. All right, but he soldiered on. All right, the tipping point. One of the tipping points for him was when he went to St. Louis and won a number of black people into God's Remnant Church, and so he brings them to church. Now, but there were no black churches then. So he brings them, this is the late 1890s, he brings them into worship into this white congregation. There was joy in heaven, but there was no joy in St. Louis, okay? And so even Ellen White talked about it. The drama was so bad that he said, okay, we're not leaving, but he was one of the first to say, maybe we are better off with our own institutions. Okay? All right, that's the first, that's critical figure number one in Black Adventists. Here's number two, Claude Barnett. Claude Barnett happened to be a pivotal figure in Black Adventism without actually being an Adventist. Elder Edmond, how is that true? I'm glad you asked that question. He was a journalist. That may be overstating it. If you know journalism, there used to be these news organizations called UPI, United Press International, where UPI would gather stories from all over the country and then share them in various newspapers. That's what he did back in the day. We had black newspapers, okay? So he would take all their news, and he was kind of the black UPI, all right? He had an Adventist friend. We kind of have figured out who it is, okay? And he shared with Claude Barnett the challenges of being a black Adventist in the 30s and 40s in a church that was every bit as segregated as the rest of society. For example, if you were at the General Conference headquarters back there in the 30s and the 40s, and it was lunchtime, guess who could not eat in the General Conference cafeteria? All of us, okay? At Andrews, where, you went to seminary, where your pastor and I went to seminary, you could eat in the cafeteria if you were black, but you had to eat at the colored table, okay? In those days, north, south, east, or west, whatever the Adventist institution, you either couldn't get in it or they only let a few black people in. It didn't matter where it was, you couldn't go. I'm gonna tell you how thoroughly segregation was a part of Adventism. Oakwood was segregated. Did you hear what I just said? Oakwood, because they had white teachers in those days, okay? And so for church, the white teachers sat on one side and the black people sat on the other. Oakwood, okay? For communion, you could not wash each other's. Oakwood, that was our school. and it was segregated. It took a strike by you all know there's a million Fordhams. One of them is the president of my conference, Furman Fordham. His grandfather was part of the student that led out in the strike that forced the church to put a black president at Oakwood. Okay? Because in those days, black people were not allowed to run anything, including their own thing. Let me give you another example how bad it was. Okay, there were no regional conferences in those days, so the black work was run by the general conference by what was called the Negro department. You know, just like you had a women's ministries department and youth department, you had the Negro department. But guess what ethnicity the leader of the Negro department was? He was white. Because black, even in Africa, up until about the 1980s, the work in Africa was led by white Europeans and white North Americans. All right? Okay. So Claude Barnett wrote about this kind of nonsense and embarrassed the church. All right? But here's figure number 3, whom some of you've heard of, Lucy Byard. Okay? Lucy Byard lived in New York, had a form of cancer, wanted to be treated in an Adventist hospital. Seventh-day Adventists do health care very well. Okay? You all live in Florida, so you know that. Advent Health, which includes what used to be Florida Hospital. Advent Health is one of the biggest non-for-profit hospital systems in the country. I used to be on their board. I'm guessing now Advent Health is about a $25 billion a year company. Not million, billion. Now, to put that in perspective, if you put all the tithe together from every member, it's a little over $3 billion for the world. So Advent Health, which isn't the only healthcare system we run, it doesn't include Loma Linda, it doesn't include Kettering, who are 2 other large hospitals, doesn't include them, all right? But Advent Health, which is mostly Florida, all right? Advent Health is 8 times bigger than the Adventist church in revenue, all right? It's the only place in the Adventist church that has money, all right? And Pastor, they are on a different pay scale than the rest of us. The rest of us are on denominational pay scale. The hospital system isn't. So I know you love your pastor, but if he gets a call to work for Advent Health, he got to go. He got to go. In fact, I'm going to keep it 100. Even though I'm retired, if Advent Health called me right now, the meeting is over. Come on now. All right. Yeah, because they are nowhere near. I remember Pastor being one of the policies in the Adventist church is the executive committee has to look at the salaries of all the employees. That's what they do. So once a year, the executive committee does what they call a salary audit. So when I was on the Advent Health Board, we did a salary audit of the top people in Advent Health. And Pastor, I saw numbers I had never seen before. I turned to my fellow presidents. I said, y'all know, and then they were talking about the CEO of Advent Health. I said, y'all know he makes what 20 of us make, literally. Yeah. So those boys they're in a different world. So once again, if they call me right now, I'm out of here. All right. So, but at the Adventists, we should be very proud of our healthcare system. We do very well. To show you how big our healthcare system is, the Orlando Magic, the NBA basketball team, they play in Advent Health Arena. Okay, healthcare is big business in the Adventist church. All right. Okay. So she wanted to be treated in an Adventist hospital, but the nearest hospital to her was Washington Sanitarium, who had a policy: we do not treat black people. And when we make exceptions to that policy, we treat them in the basement. Okay, Adventist hospital. All right, but she wanted to be treated in a hospital. In those days, you would write to be admitted. Okay, so she wrote. She was admitted. One of two, depending on which story you believe, one of two things happened next. Either they did not know Lucy Byard, who was very fair-skinned, was really black, and they admitted her, because they did. Or, story number two that some people tell, is that there were actually a few administrators who knew she was black, admitted her, but when she got there, as we say in sports, they choked. They got scared. Either way, this dying Adventist woman who had been admitted in an Adventist hospital got kicked out for only one reason: she was black. Okay? She got sent across town to the black hospital, which in those days was called Washington Freedmen's Hospital, which today is called Howard University, which today is an Adventist hospital. All right? But she went there, and a few weeks later, she died. It caused such an uproar, and I believe providentially it happened in Washington, because Washington, the main church, one of the main churches in Washington, had, this is 1943, had a larger than normal amount of black people who for those days had a college education plus. One of the members was Eva B. Dykes. If you went to Oakwood, you know Eva B. Dykes. That's who the library is named for. Eva B. Dykes was the first black woman, not the first black Adventist woman, first black woman, period, to finish the requirements for a PhD. Okay, she went to church. And there were a number of other entrepreneurs, and they did what black people, I mean, not what black people do, what Adventist people do. They formed a committee. And this committee was the Committee for the Advancement of the Worldwide Work Among Colored Seventh-day Adventists, the black Adventist version of the NAACP. And they met with the General Conference president and said, listen, enough discrimination in employment. It took this church 100 years to have the first black high-level administrator on the General Conference level. It took them 100 years to do that. Okay, and there were just scores. It was really difficult to be black in the Adventist church then, because you couldn't get into their institutions, and they wouldn't build institutions for us. All right, so they petitioned, and as a result of that, on April 8 through 11, 1944, at the spring meeting of the General Conference. We typically think of the General Conference as meeting every 5 years, but the Executive Committee, which is like the church board of the General Conference, they meet in the spring and in the fall. And in their spring meeting, they voted to allow what were called colored conferences. Okay, now there are two important things to know about that. One is, this is very important, this vote was a vote of the General Conference. We didn't get regional conferences because black people got mad and said, we out of here, we're forming our own conference. No, this was a vote of the General Conference, the vast majority of whose leaders at that time were white. In other words, regional conferences were the result of our Caucasian brethren, who in a choice, because that was not the only option. The other option was fully integrate. In a choice between integration and regional conferences. The church chose regional conferences. Okay? And that's what makes, when our man, the pastor of Pioneer Memorial, when our man says we need to get rid of regional conferences, that's why you need to know your history. Because the only reason why we have them is because his spiritual ancestors voted that because they were not ready for integration. So the irony is, what people like him are in essence saying, okay, we weren't ready for integration, now we were, here's how we're going to solve it. We're going to make you close down the entities that we made you start when we weren't ready for integration. Doesn't that sound a little strange to you? That's the reason why you need to know your history. We didn't do this. They did it. Okay? Now, I think God did it. But he used our Caucasian brethren to do it. Okay? And it's ironic that now to hear them say, no, let's all come together, but here's how we're going to come together. Y'all get rid of your conferences. Okay? The other thing that is important to note in that action is that the action specifically said to be administered by colored pastors and colored laymen. The reason why that was important was up to then, black people didn't run anything. So the vote said, no, this got to be run by black people, okay? And the reason for that, I believe, is it's always easier to work for people with whom you share a common culture. It's just easier, okay? What's easier in terms of Daughter of Zion? For you all to grow Daughter of Zion, or for our Caucasian brethren to grow Daughter of Zion? If we're reaching, now we are called to reach everybody, okay? Every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. But our first calling is to reach our own people. Because if we don't do that, who's going to do that? All right? And so the number one reason why we need regional conferences is for mission, okay? To reach people of color, which we've done at a rate that's 4 times faster than the rest of the church in North America. All right. And you see here, okay, I'm gonna come to you. Is that a question or you're stretching? Okay, you have a question. Okay, so the first regional conference was Lake Region. It was followed very quickly by Northeastern, which is the northeastern part. That's largely New York. Northeastern is the biggest block of Northeastern is New York City. Okay, Massachusetts, a little bit of Rhode Island, a little bit of New Hampshire, but it's mostly New York. And then following them was the old Allegheny Conference. Today, that conference is split up into Allegheny East and Allegheny West because it was so big. Okay, once upon a time, it stretched from Virginia and West Virginia to the south, all the way up to Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia and all that. It was Baltimore. It was just huge. So they split it up into Allegheny East and Allegheny West. So those were the first 3 to get started. Then the next year, South Central and South Atlantic, which is where you all come in. And then in 1980, because South Atlantic had gotten big, they split up South Atlantic, which was an excellent idea because at the time, South Atlantic had about 25,000 members. Between the 2 of them today, they have almost 100,000 members. Okay, so it was a very successful splitting of the conference. All right, your question. We're going to come to that. We're going to come to that. Yes. We're going to come to that. Okay, regional conferences. So we started off by telling you what they were. Then we moved into how we got them. Now we're going to talk, okay, Elder Edmond, you're talking about 1940-something. Why do we still need them in the year 2026? I'm going to give you 8 reasons. Okay, here's reason number 1. Regional conferences allow people of color to control their own resources. Let me give you 2 examples of that. Okay, remember I told you about my former office building. It's a $32,000 square foot structure that houses all of our ministries. And I told you when we opened it up 3 years ago, it was open debt-free. Give you a chance to say amen again. Think about that for a minute. $9 million? That's how much it costs. That's not, I'm not saying that's what it's worth. It is worth more than that. You know, sometimes people say, well, when they throw out figures, they're talking about appraised value. That's what it actually costs, okay? But we were able to dedicate it debt-free because the regional conferences appropriated the money to dedicate it debt-free. If we had to borrow that money, it would have cost us about $25 million more over 30 years to borrow that, which means that's $25 million that's going into some area of ministry instead of a bank. Okay, so but people, every time I talk about buildings, then people say, oh, why you put all that money in a building? How come you couldn't give it to education? Because if you have an organization, that organization has to be housed somewhere. You can't just put desks in the street. You got to have a building, which means you either have your own building or you rent a building. But when you rent a building, all you're doing is paying for somebody else's building. All right? A few years ago, the North American division got their own building. Cost them about $20 million because their building is much bigger than ours. All right? Maybe it was even more than that. So people, why you got to spend all that money? Well, they were spending $1 million a year in rent. $1 million in rent. Now, what makes more sense? Having your own building or paying somebody else $1 million for their building? That's just good stewardship. All right? So regional conferences, there was nobody that was going to give us $9 million. You know who gave us $9 million? You did. Yeah, you did. All right? And the result of that is one of the nicest buildings this church has. All right? If you've been there, if you haven't been there, you should go. You'll be very proud. Okay? All right? The other thing that we do is we run a retirement program. The NAD used to run a retirement program for all its workers, including me in those days. All right? But in the year 2000, the NAD discovered they were $1 billion underwater. $1 billion. So I don't want to hear anything about black people not being able to run anything. $1 billion underwater. So you know what they did? They ended their retirement program. They said, okay, for all of y'all who are retired, we're going to keep our commitments to you, but the rest of y'all are on your own. Okay? We will help you by contributing a certain amount. I think it's 3 to 6%, something like that. Okay, but you manage your own portfolio from this point on. All right? I guess if I were working in a state conference, I would have had to learn like the rest of them. But I had no training in portfolio management. All right? And it is a lot easier for your portfolio to take major hits than it does for a portfolio that has hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay? So our portfolio, our regional conference plan does 2 things. It does 3 things that the state conference doesn't do. 1, it provides a guaranteed monthly pension. Okay? When I retired in January, between what I get from the regional conference, what I get from Social Security, and South Central is the only conference that had what they call a supplemental retirement plan. So I get a little money from them. The three of them roughly equal my base salary while I was still working. Somebody ought to say amen. If nobody else, Ms. Edmond is going to say amen. All right? So it allows our workers to retire with a measure of dignity. When I was a young man, and the old plan tops out around $2,000. Okay? Now think about that. Okay? The old plan tops out about $2,000. And so when I was a young man, Pastor, I used to see, when you're young, you think everybody's old. But I used to see these old people still, why are they still working? Because they could not afford to retire. Okay? We would have people literally falling asleep while they preaching. Literally. Because they had to hang around, couldn't afford to retire. Okay? Praise the Lord, we don't do that anymore. All right? So the regional conference retirement plan is funded by the regional conferences, and without it, there would be if there were no regional conferences, there would be no regional conference retirement plan. All right, and it is really good for the worker and for the church to get people out before they're too old to stand up. It's just good. And I am thankful that I was able to retire while I was still healthy. Okay? And am enjoying it. Retirement is wonderful. All right. Yes, I am the most happy retiree you will ever see. I spent most of my life in church administration, and I learned on January 1 that there's actually life without stress. I didn't know that. I'm discovering that there's life without stress. I loved what I did, but it took a lot out of me. Part of my responsibility when I was at ORCM was to provide orientation for new presidents and secretaries and vice presidents. And I would tell the presidents, I said, when I was a conference president, I was going to leave office with higher blood pressure, fewer friends, and less hair. And all of that came true. All right. So I loved what I did, but I didn't love what it took out of me. So I'm glad I was able to step away with my health intact, because the reality is you only have so many years. And I said, I'm not giving any more years to the church. I'm coming home to Mrs. Edmond. All right? And we're happy about that. Isn't that right, Ms. Edmond? All right. Very good. Wonderful. Okay. But the regional conference retirement plan allows us to do that. All right? So, but we can do it only because we have our own resources. Now, the counter to that are the conferences on the West Coast where there are no regional conferences. And they operate on what's given to them by higher organizations. It's like an allowance. It is much better to have your own income than to have somebody else decide what your income is. All right? Because the ability to control your income is the ability to control your own ministry. All right? So that's reason number one. Actually, it's not even the most important reason. Here's the most important reason. Reason number two, regional conferences are the best way to reach people of color. And as I said earlier, that's not the only people we need to reach. The fact is, and we were talking about it after dinner, gentrification means that white people have moved into black neighborhoods. I understand it's happening to you all, okay? Somebody has to reach them. It's y'all. And what that means is we have to do a different kind of ministry than we've been taught to do. There's nothing that any of us were taught at Oakwood that says this is how you reach upper income white people. So what that probably means is to reach them is going to require people who look like them. But we have a responsibility. Somebody has to reach them, okay? And it's going to require a different kind of ministry than we're used to doing, all right? So that's why people of color are not the only people that we're called to reach, but that's our first area of responsibility. All right, here's reason number 3, okay? Regional conferences give people of color a seat at the decision-making table. You got to be there. I'll give you a couple of examples. There have been times when the church innocently has come up with publications that don't reflect the diversity of our church. And so I've been in meetings where you say, hold up a minute. You can't send out publications that have a bunch of Caucasians in it. You can't do that. That's not going to work for us. You got to put some of us in what you're sending out, okay? But that only happened because we were in the room. If we weren't in the room, we would not have been represented. The reality is the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a business. It's a spiritual business, but it's a business. And in business, you either have a seat at the table or you are an item on the menu, one of the two. If we didn't have our own entities, when it came time for general conference to have delegates to help elect the leaders of our church, we would have been in Southern Union saying, hey, remember us, remember black people. We don't have to say that because we have our own entities, and representation is partly decided by entities. So when I was a president, I was automatically a delegate. Your president, automatically a delegate at general conference because we have our own entities. All right, here's our next reason. Reason number 4, regional conferences are a better economic model. We already showed you that, right? Showed you that. All right, here's reason number 5. Regional conferences are one of the great success stories in this church since 1944. They've grown 4 times faster than the rest of the church in North America. Reason number 6, black churches are often the only churches in the city limits of most cities, and that's where the people are. We are where the people are, okay? Regional conferences black church entities address social issues in a way the majority culture doesn't. Let me give you an example. How many of you have ever been stopped by the police for no other reason other than you are black? How many of you have been? I'm raising my hand. I've been stopped, okay? It's called driving while black, okay? All right. I can tell you from experience, I've been stopped. My son has been stopped. Most of us have had to give our sons what I call the talk that says, when you get pulled over, you've had to give that? Yeah. I see all you nodding your head. Yeah. We got to do that, okay? Our Caucasian brethren assume that if you got stopped, you did something wrong. We know better. So they're not able to address that issue like we are, okay? So we have addressed from Regional Voice those kinds of issues. Immigration, we've addressed it, okay? DEI is a bad word to a lot of people, but in any large organization that has more than one group, there's always a group that gets left out. When I was president, we had to have DEI in South Central, and we were all black and Latino, and that is to keep the church from electing to high positions the same people over and over again. If you've been to enough constituency meetings, you know we keep sending the same people Because it is human nature to go with who we know and who we are comfortable. But that's not what's best for the organization. So I had to say, listen, for our executive committee, 25% of our executive committee has to be young adult. Because they weren't going to do that on their own. That's DEI. That's the people in power making sure that power is not concentrated among a few, but is dispersed among the many. That's what DEI is. Okay? And we're the ones. Now what that means is, it means sharing power. It means that the people who have the power can't have all the power. And that's where you see some of the pushback. I got to give up something to somebody else, okay? But the reality is, any organization, a diversity of opinions makes for better decisions, okay? Us old people, you know, we kind of like things the way they are. You need some people to push you along to say, okay, you all have done the same thing for the last 8,000 years. Why don't you try something different? On the other hand, we older people need to be around to say, okay, before you tear that fence down, understand why it's there in the first place. All new ideas are not good ideas. Everything new is not good, and everything old is not bad. On the other hand, while it's true that all new ideas are not good ideas, any organization that has no new ideas, that's a bad idea. So you need a diversity. And because we don't do that naturally, we have to figure out a way, and that's what DEI is. It's saying, listen, you're not going to do this on your own, so we're going to come up with programs that make sure that everybody is represented. All right? I can tell you that the leadership of the North American Division is very intentional about diversity. You know, I've sat in meetings where they say, no, we got to, Elder Edmond, you can't, I know you want some black people in here, but, you know, the North American Division just isn't made up of black people. We need some women here. Or we need some Caucasians here. And we do. Right? Okay? So we address those kinds of entities. We know what it's like to be left out. Okay? So we address those in ways that our brethren do not. All right? And here's the last reason. Racism is not dead. It's been around for 400 years. I remember when President Obama got elected, I saw the picture across the street of him coming to your school. When he got elected, I still remember that first time, I was saying, maybe things have changed. Okay, but then along came Brother Trump. Okay. Don't want to offend any Donald Trump fans in here, but he sees things very differently than most of us. All right? So, but because the church is diverse, we have to be careful about not allowing a divided nation to divide the church. And we struggle with that. The church is just as divided on some of these issues. All you had to do was see what happened when Charlie Kirk got killed. Okay? There was a whole lot of drama over, and for a while there was more talk about Charlie Kirk than Jesus Christ. Okay? And because the devil will use anything to divide us and keep us off the real enemy, which is him. Okay? So you got to be, you know, I have to remind myself, my wife reminds me that as tempting a target as Donald Trump can be, that I have to be careful about what I say about him, because the fact is, he wouldn't have got elected if there weren't some black people who supported him. He got a higher level of black support than any Republican in the last 60 years. Okay? So we cannot allow him to divide. So you got to be careful about what you say. Just like I'm offended, I would have been offended if they had talked about Barack Obama. There are people who are offended when you talk about Donald Trump. Our goal in the Adventist Church is not to win elections, it's to win souls. Now, elections are important. I'm not saying that. But that's not what we are called to do. Okay, so we have to be careful about what we say. And as inflammatory as Donald Trump can be, we can be just as inflammatory about him. Everybody got quiet. Okay. But it's true. It's true. Okay? And in case y'all didn't know it, there are a whole bunch of Donald Trump fans in the Adventist church. Okay. And here's the thing. We got to work with them if we're going to finish the work. I'm glad y'all didn't do this in church today. I'm going to say it again. We got to work with the Donald Trumpsters in our church to finish the work. Here's what I've discovered. The bigger your project, the more likely it is you got to work with people you don't like. That's why the government doesn't work, because nobody wants to work with somebody who doesn't agree with them. But the bigger what you're trying to do is, the more likely it is. I have been involved in two of the biggest building projects in this church. And I had to work with people I didn't like in order to make it work, okay? And that's, we have to remember that. You know, you can tell people off on social media and feel good, but we're not trying to get likes, we're trying to get souls, okay? And in a divided country, you have to be careful about what you say. All right, I'm almost done. Okay, now here's where we conclude. Where's mine? Okay, here we go. Here's where we conclude. Regional conferences. Here's some things that people believe. I'm going to give you 3 things that people believe that are not true. Here's number 1, okay? They are a relic of segregation. I was doing this presentation to Andrews, and a black person said, Elder Edmond, aren't regional conferences a relic of segregation? That's victim blaming. If regional conferences are not the cause of segregation, they're the result of segregation, okay? And if our conferences are segregated, then wouldn't that make state conferences segregated as well? All right, here's the biggest myth of all. If regional conferences went away, we'd all come together. Listen, in New York, okay, New York City, that's the largest city in the country by far. It's the largest city. Do you know there are virtually no white Adventist churches in New York? Yes. But there used to be an entire conference of Caucasians. It's called Greater New York. Greater New York today, which used to be white, Ted Wilson started in Greater New York. Now, you can't get any more Caucasian than Ted Wilson, all right? That's where he started. Today, there are virtually no white churches in New York, which leads to the question, where, that's what you were saying, where did they all go? We're not talking about a church. We're talking about a conference. Where did they all go? There's only one of 3 reasons. 3 options. 1, they all died. Every last one of them, dead. Okay, all died. We know that's not true. 2, they disappeared in the Hudson River. They're operating underwater like Atlantis. That's not true. Only leaves us one option. Given a choice between attending a church that's no longer overwhelmingly Caucasian and not attending church at all. We have defined diversity as very narrowly the presence of Caucasians. That's our definition of, that's black people's definition. But it's not so. I'm going to prove it. How many of you in this room were either born outside the United States or your parents were born outside the United States? Let me see your hands. Okay, keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. That's diversity. That's diversity. Okay? This is a diverse church. You've come from a bunch of different countries. But we have because we drink the Kool-Aid. We have allowed our Caucasian brethren to control the narrative. And I should have said this earlier, lest I sound like an angry old black man. As president, I hired the first Caucasian pastor. I hired the first Caucasian school teacher. I hired the first females. I believe in diversity, but in the United States, it's a one-way street. It only occurs because we go to the majority. The majority doesn't come to us. In fact, not only does the majority not come to us, but the majority, when they're no longer an overwhelming majority, run from us. You cannot integrate with people who leave when you get there. The greatest building program in the world. If y'all need another church, here's how you could get it. Pastor, you wouldn't have to borrow money. You wouldn't have to raise money. You wouldn't have to have a capital campaign. All you have to do, that's all you got to do. All of y'all go to a Caucasian church. Now y'all laugh. But isn't that true? If enough of you came, they would leave. Okay? Now, some of that is racism. It just is. But all of it isn't. Some of that is a difference of culture. Okay? We worship differently. When I preach in white churches, I preach differently than I preach today. Okay? Now, do I preach like our culture? No, I don't. But I take a little off. Okay? Because I respect their culture. They're not ready. Okay? They're not. Okay? So there is nothing wrong. I'm closing. There's nothing wrong with people of the same culture saying we want to worship together. That's why you have Japanese churches and Spanish churches and Korean. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is when those same people say, we want our culture and none of the rest of y'all can come. And all of us who are of a certain age either had this experience or know somebody who did. You know what it is? You went to a white church and they said, either you can't come or wouldn't you be more comfortable down the street? Okay? You cannot, I'm going to say it one more time. You can't integrate with people who leave when you get there. Okay? We are in search of diversity. We need to understand diversity is not in search of us. Here's the fact. Not only are regional conferences good for us, they're good for our Caucasian brothers. Because if there were no regional conferences, you'd be in their church. And if you were in their church, guess who wouldn't be in their church? Them. Okay? Now again, some of it's racism, but some of it's culture. Okay? And I started out in the Caribbean, even though I'm not West Indian. My first church was in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And that's where I learned about peas and rice, or rice and peas, depending on. I knew nothing about West Indian culture. I thought everybody from the Caribbean talked alike. But now I know, just like there are different accents in the United States, and now I can say, oh yeah, he's from Trinidad. He's from Trinidad. She's from Jamaica. See, I know that now. That was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because it totally exposed me to a different culture. Okay? But when Ms. Edmond and I got over there almost 50 years ago, those churches were white in their orientation. because their leaders have been trained in white schools, okay? I preached in Africa a couple years ago, okay? Large African church on the Ivory Coast. That church, Africa, that church was as white as any church I ever preached in because that was their orientation. That was their culture. So some of what we see is not racism, it's culture, okay? Not comfortable with the music being a certain way, culture shock. Now, I have culture shock in black church sometimes when the music is so loud. I got to yell in my wife's ear to be heard when they sing the same verses 72 times. I got culture shock too, okay? So I understand, okay? All right? Nothing wrong with it, all right? But the idea that we would all come together, no, it would be worse if it weren't for regional conferences. All right. The integration, and this is why this is really what I was saying earlier, the integration, that's a myth, that integration is a two-way street. It isn't. It's not a two-way street in the world. If black people move into a white neighborhood, white people leave. So it's not, it's a myth in the world, and it's a myth in the church. All right. Black people do not seek diversity. Okay, here's where I close. Here's the reason why you need to know your history. See that sink? Allegheny, which is where I was born. Allegheny Conference, when they started, their office was a borrowed room in the bookstore of one of their members. Remember, one of their members owned a bookstore. He rented out some space. They couldn't even afford their own office. The president's desk was a sink with a board on it. That's what they had. That's Allegheny East today. It is the wealthiest regional conference. And so the reason why we need to know our history is so, ladies and gentlemen, we can celebrate the difference between that and this, to see how far the Lord has brought us. Let me close by telling you, I've had the privilege several times of going to Africa. The last time I went, it was to this place called Durban, South Africa. It took me 33 hours to get there. It almost killed me. But you know what? That's not how our ancestors came over. They came over in a boat. It took them months, and nobody cared whether they lived or died. You ever read in the Bible about those people groups who don't exist anymore? The Jebusites and the Hittites and the Hivites and all them other ites. You know who ought to be in there? The Negroites. Because if it had not been for the Lord, did y'all hear what I said? If it hadn't been for the Lord, we wouldn't have made it. And so the reason why we need to know who we are and how far we've come is so that we can celebrate a God who, when nobody else cared about us, took care of us. Amen. Okay, I'm done. Okay, real quick. Any questions?
I was just about to say that. We got a question here,
Okay.
question there. We're going to need.
Okay.
Make sure you use the mics because we have people watching online.
Yeah, when you speak about Lucy Beard, the president of the General Conference was Michael Henry at the time. He went down to DuPont Church to talk to the brethren about the situation. And he said, "Think it not strange concerning the sorry trials." And the brother got up and said, "And I know you ain't gonna say, 'Servants, obey your masters in the Lord.'" And he shut up because they were so angry and he didn't know how to address it. Because they like to quote scripture to pacify us, not wanting to answer the question.
By the way, there are a couple of books that you can get that will help you with your understanding of African American history, Adventist African American history. One of them was a quotation that you made in that book. It's called Change Agents. Change Agents. You can get it on Amazon by Douglas Morgan, who ironically is white. But he wrote an excellent book on Adventist American, African American Adventist history, Change Agents, okay? The other book is called Protest and Progress by Calvin Rock, okay? Both of those, if you want to know more about black, and actually they're the source of a lot of what I shared with you today. All right, somebody else had a question. That's good too. It's just older. It's not as up to date, but that's good too. And for a while, that was all we had. Yeah. And that's even older. Yeah. They just did a reprint of Angels and Ebony. Yeah. I don't know how many copies they made, but I got a copy. Yes.
I just want to ask again, can churches be hurt by the diminish of members? Yeah, the reason why I asked that because we see that a lot of churches are being hurt now, and to keep the heads above water, what would that take to keep the church's head above water when the members are diminishing?
Well, we had, that's a good question. One of the things that we're going through now is, remember we talked about the growth in our Adventist church. That growth has slowed, okay? And I think one of the things that we have kind of forgotten about is one of the things that contributed to the growth is just the generational evangelists that we had in those days, the C.D. Brookses and the E.E. Clevelands and the C.E. Bradfords and Walter Pearson. That was a major contributing factor. But what we forget is the reason why those people were able to baptize people was because the members brought the people to the tent in order to hear them in the first place. I shared with you, my first pastor was C.D. Brooks. My father was an elder. And I mean, we were at those tent meetings with guests. And some of those guests got baptized, okay? The missing, one of my friends said one time, the missing ingredient in Adventist evangelism is Adventists, okay? Because we don't have, when those guys were out there every night for 8 weeks, try that today. You be there, you be at church by yourself. I've seen it in my day. I've seen it cut from 8 weeks to 4 weeks. Now we're talking about 2 weeks. Now we're talking about weekends. Yeah. Okay. So that's a big part, and we've got to figure out how we can get us back into evangelism. Because no matter how great the preacher is, we need us not only to bring them, but to keep them. Because that's the other challenge we have. When we do baptize them, we have a hard time. We have a hard time keeping them. Okay.
Have you heard, I haven't, but for those who are saying the regional conferences should go away, what are they suggesting should happen to all of the assets, the millions of dollars in assets, the campgrounds, the church? What are they suggesting happen to those assets, and who's going to manage them?
There's actually two questions in there. First of all, I'm not hearing as much anymore about getting rid of regional conferences. So I really haven't heard that in a long time. Okay, so that's a good thing. I think people have kind of made their peace with the fact that they're going to be here. I actually posed that question to the gentleman who you referenced, And he said, I don't know, we'll work it out. Well, okay. The reality is just the retirement system makes that impossible, okay? We have two completely different retirement systems, okay? If I retired and I had to walk away from our retirement system, I wouldn't have anything, nothing, okay? And they could not suddenly join the regional conference retirement because they have not been accounted for actuarially. So, every year we have to do an actuarial study to make sure that we're funding at a proper level. You can't suddenly dump thousands of people on a retirement system without it sinking, okay? So that by itself makes it hard to, even if there were no other reason. Then the other thing is, what do you, if I'm the president of South Central and Joe Blow is the president of Kentucky 10, somebody's not going to be president and it's not a matter of, it's not important who becomes president, but what is important is somebody's going to lose their job, okay? Because then you're really going to have duplication of services. My administrative assistant, and I had an administrative assistant who was excellent. So does the Kentucky Tennessee. There's not going to be two administrative assistants, okay? So somebody's going to lose their job. Who's going to pay the severance package? Because all those people who lose their jobs have to get severance packages that generally speaking are equal to 6 months' salary, okay? That's a lot of money if you got to get rid of a lot of people. Who's paying that, okay? So just to say, let's shut them down without any thought to what happens next is not a good idea. All right? Okay, let me see the hands, because pretty soon I'm gonna be the only person in here. So we're not gonna do that. So who has questions? And then we'll take whoever has their hand up and then we'll close. Okay, so I see one. Okay, so you got the last word then. Okay, the last question, we all agree? Is the last question. Because I've done this before and then people get mad when I say, no, we can't have any more. Okay, so last call, last question. All right, we good? You had one too? Okay, so we'll go to you first, and then we'll close with Brother Albury, is that right? Okay. Okay, no, we gotta give you one.
Well, I guess I had a question and a comment first. When we talk about how we move over into the other churches and then they leave, I don't know, for me, I get a sense of we feel somehow that we're better off leaving our own culture, that it's somehow better. And then you get there and you realize you're really not welcome, as you said, because we do the same thing in our neighborhoods. Instead of reaching back and realizing how hard our people fought to get us where we are, then we want to turn our backs on that because but we're never accepted there. And for some reason, we have this thing that it's a bad thing to be black or to accept who we are. That's who God made us. God made us this way. And so we need to learn to appreciate our history and our culture. The other thing, too, I will be honest with you, I didn't grow up Adventist. And when I came into the Adventist church, I was like, that was culture shock for me, because I'm like, y'all acting like white Catholics or Catholic people. It was a total culture shock. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's still sort of that way for me still, because I don't really feel like I'm truly being who I am and who I grew, how I grew up. I feel like, but I've learned to respect other people's style of worship, but I also expect that you respect my style of worship. We have to learn to get along, just because you didn't grow up with the drums and this and that, but I'm learning to respect those who like to be silent, who like to be quiet. It's tough. It's tough because I don't really feel like I'm being 100% me. I'm not being 100. Now, as far as what we can do about the evangelism, getting people back here, even I myself haven't, figured that part out, because you have these other mega churches and just, not so much mega churches, but other churches that are offering so many other things within their congregations that are attracting. But I feel, too, we have to be careful to some degree with that also, because, a lot of that, it's more of a social club to me, to some degree. So we have to figure out how we can get people and get them to stay. I think with Adventists, this has been my experience coming in, and I'm going to shut up. Adventist people, many, not all, are very haughty. We have been taught or come to this conclusion that we're better than all the other denominations out there. Everybody should be like us. And but we're not loving. It's getting, I feel even here now we're getting better. But it's almost like, it was like a hypocritical thing for me, like the attraction is there because we can perform as far as showing that love and that hospitality in one sense, but then when you get here, it's a whole different ball game. And so we got to work on that, because to me, and I'll be honest with you, I have been ashamed to invite people to church because of the coldness and how we feel we're so loving, but we really aren't. And and I just don't. It's hard for me to invite people here.
Okay. One of the things I learned from my wife is how people feel is how they feel. So I don't want to tell you how you should feel, especially in a church that I've been to twice in 30 years. So I can't tell you. I do know that one of the mistakes that we make is we assume people know things that they don't know. Okay. So for example, how do we relate to people who have joined our church? We don't talk about that. Okay, and so the assumption is everybody knows how to treat people when they're, and they don't. And so it would be helpful if we were intentional. And some of the mega churches, at least, I'm not a member, but if you read what they put out, they say they're intentional, and they're mega churches, so they're doing something. If we want to grow, growth isn't accidental, it's intentional. Okay, so if we not planning, if we don't have a plan for growth, we shouldn't be surprised if we're not growing. Okay, and it's not that people are saying I don't care about growth, I'm not thinking about it. It's just not something that unless we're intentional about it, is going to happen. So I think at least some of what you're referring to is not intentional. It's just we haven't addressed it. It's kind of like assuming people who are about to get married have any clue about what married life is like. And so typically what we do is we give a marital counseling, and even that doesn't fully prepare you for what, but at least there's an attempt to say, you know what, y'all have never done this before. So yeah. So, I think the two of those are kind of related. Okay, last question.
Actually, just a statement, and I want to say so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. One of the things, of course, I'm a third-generation Adventist, much like yourself. So I was born on the front pew here. And one of the things that sort of happened is that over the years, you always heard people blame the segregation, if you would, on stylistics. It's a little different. You worship, and you touched on that as well. but we have to be real. One of the things, too, just kind of hit a few things as it relates to our inability to grow. We are inconvenient truth. The Adventist message, right? We have the truth, but it's inconvenient for people. It means now you got to change your lifestyle and everything else, and it's very difficult for people to embrace that. I'm sure, I see you nodding when people have come in, and you've sort of noticed that, is how we go about acclimating people to the church, right? And having had grown up in this church here, it is much different today, and this is not offensive or anything else. It's different. There has been a cultural shift here as well, and since some things we don't talk about, right, because it's inconvenient. But you never get to the bottom of things if you don't talk about it and you don't address it. And so the addressing that we need to do here is how do we bring people in here and keep them in here? What do we do? Of course, as it relates to evangelism, a lot of, and I don't know if, in Alabama and so forth, but in the local municipalities and so forth have passed ordinances, so there are certain things you can't do. You can't go and gather, and you can't go more than 2 weeks, and efforts and all of that. So a lot of things have changed, but we have to look at how do we go about changing as well to meet those roadblocks. There was a book I read, and we made mention of books, The Last Trolley Out, Organize and Defeat the Devil, and all of those books that I've read and so forth. And it was just amazing how our pioneers, and I'm talking about black pioneers and so forth, they transition when things transition as well, right? So much like Paul said, I must become all things now, right? And so we became that. Last thing I'll say is simply this, is that, again, for us, we have to figure out what can we do. When you look at, you're talking about the mega churches. For instance, one of the biggest churches here in South Florida is Christ Fellowship. They buy grocery stores that have gone out of business. That's just how big they are, right? And one of the things, if you've never gone, and I went there, I'll make it quick, my granddaughter, my mom goes there, and it's like Jesus in an instant. You're there 30 minutes, that's it. From getting there to getting out, but the bottom line is that they have so many ministries. Everywhere you turn, there's a ministry for this. There's a ministry for that, and we have stopped with a lot of our ministries. When Jesus walked the earth, he met their needs. They're meeting people's needs, their physical needs, and then they give them Jesus in 30 minutes, right? So we have to figure out what we have to do differently in order to meet the needs of the people in our community so that they will come and stay.
Okay, you guys have been great. I appreciate you hanging around. But I'm going to turn it over to the pastor so I can loose you and let you go. I don't want you to say he's like Pharaoh. He wouldn't let the people go. So.
Thank you, Elder. I pray this was very informative for us, able to answer some questions. It's good to learn, always learning, right? So we want to thank Pastor Edmonds and his wife for being here with us, and we're going to close off with the word of prayer. I think we need to take an offering or something. We're going to be good Adventists. Can we take up an offering? While we're doing that, I want to let everyone know that next Sabbath, we're going to have Pastor Wesley Bruce. He's going to be here for our last Sabbath for Black History, and he will also be doing a presentation in the afternoon, right after our potluck. And so any announcement on potluck, Elder?
Just remember to bring your dishes so we can all share together. All right?
All right.
We share together.
All right. So while we're working on the offering, Pastor Edmond, let's have a word of prayer for you. I think you said you're going to be traveling in Los Angeles. So I want to pray that God grant you and your family traveling mercies as you continue your leg of journey. And let's do that at this time, and we're going to pray over the offering that's going to be collected. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for blessing us today. We had a wonderful, good day. And we thank you for the fellowship and the information we learned, and we also pray that the Holy Spirit may lead it to be transformation for us. We ask that you will bless Pastor Edmonds and his family, his wife, as they continue their travel from here to their next destination. And we ask that you bless those who have to give and those who are not able to give as well. In Christ's name, amen. The usher, you could just station yourself at the door, and on your way out, we just, oh, you're already here. Okay, go ahead. All right, we'll do it like, okay, amen. And you can give the Adventist giving to you. Probably didn't come prepared to